Michael Roberts stood alone at the kitchen window, staring out into the misty twilight. Autumn had fallen heavy upon the small town of Riverview, Washington, blanketing everything in shades of amber and gray. 6 months had passed since Elizabeth's death, but her absence still felt like an open wound. Each room in their home whispered memories of her laughter, her warmth. Without her, everything felt colder, quieter. He sipped his coffee slowly, barely tasting it. Lately, evenings were the hardest. It was when the house felt emptiest, when the silence became unbearable. His 15-year-old son, Jake, seemed to sense this as well. Over the past few weeks, Jake had withdrawn into himself, becoming quiet and distant. Michael assumed it was a teenager's natural reaction to grief, but lately he noticed something else, something stranger. Jake had developed a peculiar habit of disappearing every evening, slipping out of the house quietly after dinner. At first, Michael dismissed it as a teenager needing space. But then, food began to vanish from the kitchen. Bread, fruit, leftovers, gone overnight. Michael had gently questioned Jake about it, but the boy had merely shrugged, offering only vague answers. Tonight, Michael decided, he'd find out the truth. A mixture of curiosity and parental worry gnawed at him as he watched Jake silently pack food into a backpack. Pretending to focus on his phone, Michael observed Jake zip his jacket, sling the backpack over his shoulder, and quietly exit through the back door. Michael waited a few moments before grabbing his coat. His heart raced slightly, a strange sense of anticipation tingling in his chest. He stepped outside into the chill evening air, following Jake at a careful distance. Jake moved purposefully, his silhouette outlined by the dying daylight as he crossed their backyard, heading toward the old, neglected barn at the edge of their property. Michael frowned. The barn was practically forgotten, hidden beneath layers of ivy and years of neglect. Elizabeth had often joked about turning it into a guest house someday, but life, and eventually death, had other plans. As Jake disappeared inside, Michael moved closer, careful to remain unseen. Reaching the barn's window, he hesitated, hearing muffled voices inside. Voices? His pulse quickened. Who was Jake speaking to? Michael leaned in, peering through the dusty window. Inside, lit dimly by a small camping lantern, he saw Jake kneeling next to someone, a girl. She looked around Jake's age, thin and pale, with long, tangled hair. Her large eyes watched Jake carefully as he handed her food, her expression a mixture of gratitude and fear. Michael's breath caught. The girl's face, illuminated softly by the lantern, bore an uncanny resemblance to Elizabeth. For a dizzying moment, his mind raced with impossible thoughts. Could it be? No, it wasn't Elizabeth. But the similarity was undeniable, unsettling. Jake spoke gently to her, his voice too soft to fully understand. Michael felt frozen, his mind swirling with confusion. Who was this girl hiding in his barn? And why did she look so much like his late wife? As if sensing Michael's presence, Jake glanced towards the window. Their eyes met briefly through the grimy glass, Jake's widening in shock. For a long, tense moment, neither moved. Michael saw panic flash in his son's eyes, a silent plea to understand, to not interfere. Michael stepped back, heart pounding heavily in his chest. He didn't understand yet, but he knew one thing clearly. His son was keeping a secret, and whatever it was tied to Elizabeth. Taking a deep breath, Michael moved slowly toward the barn's entrance. It was time to face the truth, no matter how painful or unsettling it might be. Michael didn't sleep that night. He sat on the edge of his bed, staring into the darkness, hands clasped between his knees. His heart pounded with a rhythm that matched the flicker of thoughts racing through his mind. The image of the girl in the barn haunted him, her pale face, tangled hair, hollow cheeks. But more than that, it was the familiarity that clung to her like a shadow. She didn't just resemble his late wife, Elizabeth. She looked exactly like her. Same soft jawline, same wide, watchful eyes. Even her voice, the few whispered words he'd heard, carried a tone so painfully familiar, it made his chest tighten. How could this be? He tried to reason with himself. Maybe he was projecting. Maybe grief was distorting what he saw. It wouldn't be the first time. Since Elizabeth's death 6 months ago, he'd caught himself mistaking strangers on the street, hearing her voice in the grocery store, smelling her perfume in passing. His mind wanted to keep her alive. But this girl, she was real. Downstairs, he heard the faint creak of a floorboard. His son, Jake, moving around quietly, likely preparing another bundle of food to sneak away. Michael stayed still. He wanted to rush down, grab his son by the shoulders and demand answers. But he knew better. He couldn't spook Jake. Not now. Not when something clearly bigger was going on. The next morning, he waited in the kitchen. Jake entered, his eyes flicking toward the fridge, then quickly away when he noticed his father seated at the table, coffee untouched, gaze heavy. "Morning," Jake muttered. "Sit down," Michael said calmly. Jake hesitated, then obeyed. They sat in silence for a few moments. "I saw you go out last night," Michael began, tone even. "I followed you to the barn." Jake's face froze, the color drained slightly from his cheeks. Michael leaned forward. "Jake, who is that girl?" Jake swallowed hard. "Her name's Laura," Michael blinked. "Laura?" "Yeah," Jake nodded. "I found her about 3 weeks ago. She was in the woods behind the field, hiding. She looked like Mom. I thought I was going crazy." "So did I," Michael murmured. "She was scared. Said someone was looking for her, that she couldn't go back." Michael exhaled slowly, processing. "Is she homeless?" Jake shook his head. "I don't know. She won't say much. Just that she was with her mom, but now she's gone. And the man she lived with, he was dangerous." Michael studied his son, the worry in his eyes, the tension in his shoulders. He realized Jake hadn't just been hiding the girl. He'd been protecting her. "I didn't know what else to do," Jake said. "She didn't want to go to the cops. I just thought if I brought her food, kept her warm." Michael nodded. He wasn't angry, not with Jake. But the question burned deeper now. Who was this girl? This Laura who looked like Elizabeth's reflection? And why was she running? He had to find out. Michael stood at the threshold of the barn the next evening, his breath fogging in the crisp air. He had texted Jake before leaving the house. "Stay home tonight. I need to talk to her." There had been no reply, but Jake hadn't followed. Inside the barn, the lantern was already lit. The girl sat on a folded blanket, wrapped in Jake's old sleeping bag. She startled when she saw Michael, her eyes wide with fear. He paused, hands visible, unthreatening. "I'm not here to hurt you," he said softly. "I just want to talk." She hesitated, then gave a small nod. Michael stepped closer, enough to see the dirt smudges on her cheeks, the way her knees were pulled tight to her chest. "My name's Michael," he began. "Jake's father—" "I know," she said quietly. Silence stretched between them. "What's your name?" he asked, though he already suspected. She looked down. "Laura?" His throat tightened. "Laura, what's your last name?" She hesitated. "Carter?" Michael's breath caught. Elizabeth's maiden name was Carter. He crouched down slowly, not close enough to intimidate her. You look so much like someone I used to know." She glanced up at him. "Elizabeth?" He nodded, stunned. "She was my aunt," Laura whispered, "but I never met her. My mom talked about her sometimes, when she wasn't drunk." Michael's world shifted. She said Elizabeth was her twin. They were separated when they were teenagers. Something happened between them and their parents. I don't know the details. Mom always said Elizabeth had the good life. Laura paused. She said I looked like her. That's why she hated me sometimes. Michael sat down heavily on an overturned crate. "A sister?" Elizabeth never mentioned a sister, let alone a twin. "Your mother's name, was it Caroline?" he asked. Laura nodded. "Caroline Carter. She died 2 months ago, overdose." "And the man you lived with?" "He's not my father," she said quickly, eyes darkening. "He was just there. After Mom got worse, he started drinking, hitting. I left the day he tried to lock me in." Michael clenched his fists, jaw tight. He looked at the girl, so young, so guarded. And yet she carried a piece of Elizabeth he thought he'd lost forever. She wanted me to find Elizabeth, Laura said. She said she owed her, that maybe she'd take me in. But when I looked her up online, her voice faltered, I saw the obituary. Michael felt the final piece slide into place. This girl, Elizabeth's niece, alone in the world, had come looking for someone who could never answer the door. But fate had led her to Jake, and now to him. You're safe now, Michael said gently, and we'll figure this out. Together. Laura didn't reply, but she didn't pull away when he reached out either. The next morning, Michael found himself standing in front of the hallway closet, the one Elizabeth always kept locked. He'd never questioned it much during their marriage. Everyone had their private spaces. But now, with the name Carolyn Carter echoing in his mind, he was desperate for answers. He pulled down the box labeled Old Files and brought it to the dining table. Jake sat nearby, watching silently, still uncertain where things stood after the night before. Michael opened the box. At first, it was all familiar. Old property documents, utility receipts, a few forgotten photo albums. But tucked beneath them, in a faded blue folder, he found a stack of envelopes, all addressed to Caroline Carter. None had postage. None had been sent. His pulse quickened as he opened the first. Dear Carrie, I wish things had been different. I still hear your voice when I fall asleep. I still remember that night when everything broke. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I want you to know I didn't forget you. I just didn't know how to find my way back. Love always, Liz. Michael's hands trembled slightly as he opened the next. I saw a girl today with your eyes. It made me wonder if you had children. I hope you're happy. I hope you found peace. If you ever read this, know that I never stopped being your sister, even when I stopped being brave enough to say it aloud. Jake leaned closer. What is it? Michael looked up at him, voice low. Letters. Your mom wrote them to her sister. Jake frowned. She had a sister? Michael nodded slowly. A twin. He placed the letters aside and picked up an old photo curling at the edges. Two teenage girls, arm in arm, identical smiles. Elizabeth and Caroline, it said on the back in Elizabeth's handwriting. Jake sat back, stunned. She never told me about her, Michael said quietly. I don't know why, but whatever happened between them, she regretted it. You can feel it in the words. Jake stared at the letters, something shifting behind his eyes. So that means Laura really is family, Michael nodded. Yes, she's your cousin. They sat in silence for a moment. I think Mom would have wanted us to help her, Jake said at last. She tried. Even if she never sent the letters, she still loved her sister. Michael reached over and squeezed his son's shoulder gently. And now it's our turn. Outside the window, the early morning sun finally broke through the clouds, casting a warm golden hue across the room. For the first time in a long time, the house felt a little less empty. Michael stood in the sheriff's office, gripping the folder of Elizabeth's unsent letters. He hadn't planned to come here, not yet, but something gnawed at him. The image of Laura's bruised arms, the shadows in her eyes, the fear when she spoke of the man she'd fled. She needed more than kindness and shelter. She needed protection. Sheriff Weston, a kind, observant man in his 50s, looked over the folder quietly, then back at Michael. You're saying she's the daughter of a woman your wife never told you about? Weston asked, brow raised. She's Elizabeth's niece. I'm sure of it now, Michael replied, and I think she's in real danger. She said the man she lived with hurt her, that he's looking for her. Weston leaned back in his chair, fingers tapping the desk. We've had no missing child reports matching her description, he said. No runaway notices under the name Laura Carter. Michael frowned. She could be under a different last name, or maybe she was never registered anywhere. Her mother, Caroline, was a wreck, according to Laura. The sheriff nodded. All right, let's run what we can. He turned to his computer and began typing. The soft clacking of keys filled the silence between them. A few minutes passed before Weston's face shifted. I've got something. Michael leaned in. Laura Whitman, 14. Reported missing in Portland 2 months ago. He clicked into the file. Mother, Caroline Whitman, formerly Caroline Carter. Deceased of overdose 3 weeks prior. Foster placement attempted, but Laura vanished from intake before she was entered into the system. They thought she ran back to her mother's circle. Case went cold. Michael closed his eyes. That's her. It has to be. The sheriff nodded grimly. Well, you've got yourself in the middle of a pretty big mess, Michael. She's just a child, Michael said. She's been hiding in my barn, starving, traumatized. And she's family. Weston studied him for a long moment, then exhaled. I'll keep this quiet for now. No formal report, not until we talk to the right people at Child Services. But if this man she ran from shows up here, things could get ugly. Michael gave a tight nod. Then we'll be ready. Back at home, Jake was sitting on the porch steps when Michael returned. She's sleeping, Jake said quietly. Michael sat down beside him. The boy looked older somehow, more guarded, more aware. I talked to the sheriff, Michael said. Her real name is Laura Whitman. She's been missing for months. Jake didn't look surprised. She told me her mom was in trouble, he murmured, that she was scared every day. Michael glanced toward the barn, his voice firm. We're not letting her go back to that life. Jake turned to him. Promise? Michael looked him in the eye. I promise. For the first time in months, Jake nodded. Not as a boy asking for reassurance, but as someone accepting it. The following afternoon brought gray skies and the sharp smell of wet leaves. Michael had just stepped onto the porch with a cup of coffee when a rusted blue pickup truck rolled slowly past the house. It wasn't a familiar vehicle. Michael narrowed his eyes. The driver was a man in his late 30s or 40s. Heavy-set stubbled jaw, baseball cap pulled low. He drove too slowly, head turning just enough to survey the property. Then, without stopping, the truck continued down the road and disappeared behind the trees. Michael stood frozen, pulse quickening. He went back inside, grabbed his phone, and texted the sheriff. Blue pickup, Oregon plates, circling the area. Possibly him? Then he went to the barn. Laura was awake, sitting cross-legged on the blanket, flipping through an old book Jake had brought her. She looked up, startled when Michael entered. It's okay, he said gently, crouching down. I just need to ask you something. Did the man who hurt you drive a blue pickup? She stared at him, color draining from her face. Her lips parted, but no sound came. Then she gave a faint nod. Did it have Oregon plates? She nodded again, this time more quickly, panic rising behind her eyes. Michael took a breath. I think he was just here, driving by. Laura clutched the book to her chest, fingers trembling. You're safe here, Michael said firmly. He didn't stop. But I need you to trust me now. No more hiding. If he's looking for you, we need to make it official. That means getting you into the system the right way, with protection. Laura looked at him, tears welling in her eyes. If they take me, I'll disappear again. They always do. They won't, he said. Not if I take guardianship. Not if I fight for it. Her lip quivered. But why would you do that? I'm no one to you. Michael looked at her carefully. That's not true. You're family. You're all that's left of someone I loved more than life. Laura blinked, stunned. I didn't know your mother existed, he said softly, but I know she mattered to Elizabeth. I found the letters. She never stopped thinking about her. And now, she sent you to us. Somehow, you found your way here. Tears slipped down Laura's cheeks. Michael reached out gently and placed a hand on hers. You're not alone anymore, he said. She didn't pull away. Later that evening, Jake came to sit by the fire in the living room. The barn was too cold now, and Laura had moved inside, sleeping in the guest room. She hadn't said much, but she hadn't asked to leave either. I saw the truck too, Jake said quietly. He's looking for her, isn't he? Michael nodded. But we're going to make sure he doesn't find her. Jake stared into the flames. I think Mom would have liked her. Michael smiled faintly. I think so too. Michael was woken by the sound of tires on gravel. It was just past midnight. He sat up in bed, heart instantly alert. The house was silent, too silent. He moved to the window and looked out toward the driveway. The blue pickup was back. This time, it stopped. Michael's breath caught in his throat as the driver's door creaked open. The man stepped out, silhouetted by the headlights, scanning the house slowly, deliberately. He didn't approach, just stood there, staring. Then, as if satisfied, he lit a cigarette and leaned against the truck. Michael grabbed his phone and dialed. "Weston," came the groggy voice on the other end. "He's back," Michael whispered. "The man in the truck. He's parked outside my house." "Stay inside," Weston said sharply. "I'm on my way." Michael hung up and moved quickly down the hall. Laura's door was slightly ajar. He peeked in. She was awake, curled up in bed, clutching a pillow, eyes wide with fear. "He's here, isn't he?" she whispered. Michael nodded. "But the sheriff's on his way." She sat up slowly, lips trembling. "He won't stop. He always finds me." Michael stepped inside and knelt beside her. "Not this time." "I can't go back," she said, voice cracking. "You won't," he promised. "Not while I'm breathing." 10 minutes later, red and blue lights flashed through the windows. Weston stepped out of his cruiser, hand on his holster. The man in the truck flicked his cigarette and crossed his arms. "What brings you out tonight?" Weston called. "Just looking for someone," the man answered casually. "My niece ran away. She's 14. Been missing for weeks." "You reported her missing?" Weston asked. "Nope," the man said, smirking. "Didn't know where to call." Michael stood just outside the door, watching. He saw Weston's jaw tighten. "Well, now you've called," Weston replied. "And unless you've got legal guardianship papers, you're not taking anyone anywhere." The man sneered. "She belongs to me." "No," said a voice behind Michael. It was Laura. She had stepped outside, pale but steady, Jake close behind her. Her hands were balled into fists, but her eyes were clear. "You don't own me," she said, "and you never will." The man's smirk faltered. "You're done hurting me," she said. Weston stepped between them. "You heard her. Leave. And if I see you again, you'll be answering to more than just me." The man hesitated, then got back in the truck, tires spitting gravel as he pulled away into the night. Inside the house, Laura sat on the edge of the couch, shaking. Jake brought her a glass of water. Michael knelt before her again, like he had in the barn. "You were brave," he said. "That was everything." She nodded slowly, tears slipping down her cheeks. "It's over?" He looked at her, then at Jake. "It's just beginning." The morning after the confrontation, the house felt different. Still, safe. Michael stood in the kitchen, pouring coffee with a sense of tension that had finally begun to ease. The blue pickup was gone. Weston had called just after dawn. The man had been arrested 2 counties over for outstanding warrants unrelated to Laura, but serious enough to keep him locked up. Jake sat at the table, eyes red but calm, scrolling through something on his phone. Laura was upstairs, asleep, finally resting without fear for the first time in weeks. Michael handed Jake a plate of toast. "She okay?" Jake asked. "She will be," Michael replied. "We all will." They ate in silence for a few minutes. Not the strained kind they'd known for months, but something more like understanding. A shared ground. Michael broke it gently. "I spoke to a lawyer." Jake looked up. "She's helping me apply for temporary guardianship. It's not simple, especially since Laura's technically in the system now. But with everything we know, we've got a strong case, if Laura wants to stay." Jake lowered his gaze. "She's afraid to hope." Michael nodded. "Aren't we all?" Later that afternoon, Michael brought a box up to the guest room. Laura was sitting cross-legged on the bed, wrapped in one of Elizabeth's old shawls. She looked fragile, but more present than before. Her eyes met his as he set the box down. "I found this in the attic," he said. "It belonged to your mother and Elizabeth. Letters, old photos. Maybe they'll help answer some of the questions you carry." Laura reached into the box with trembling fingers, pulling out a photo. 2 girls in matching dresses, laughing at something out of frame. "She looks happy," Laura whispered. "She was," Michael said. "At least for a while." Laura looked at him. "Why didn't she tell you about my mom?" "I don't know," he admitted. "Maybe she was ashamed. Maybe she was protecting something. Or someone. But I know this. She never stopped loving your mother." And I think if she were here, she'd want you with us. Tears welled in Laura's eyes. I want that too, but I don't want to take her place. Michael sat beside her. You're not. No one ever will. But you're part of her. And now, you're part of us. She nodded slowly. That night, Jake knocked on Laura's door. She opened it in silence, but when she saw him, she managed a small smile. Want to play something? He asked, holding up his phone. She nodded, stepping aside to let him in. They sat on the rug side by side, playing an old puzzle game. No words passed between them for a long time, but something softer had started to settle. Trust, perhaps, or the fragile beginnings of peace. Downstairs, Michael stared at the empty fireplace. Then, slowly, he picked up the matchbox. He lit the fire. The warmth spread through the house. The paperwork was filed. Michael stood outside the courthouse, hands in his coat pockets, watching as the flag above fluttered in the November wind. The air was sharp with the promise of winter, and yet he felt lighter than he had in months, maybe years. Beside him stood Laura, in a clean jacket that had once belonged to Elizabeth. Her cheeks were pink from the cold, but her eyes were steady. She didn't clutch his sleeve or look for escape. She stood tall, like someone beginning to believe she deserved to take up space. Jake had stayed home from school, not by illness, but by choice. She shouldn't have to go in there alone, he had said, and Michael hadn't argued. Inside the courthouse, the judge had reviewed the emergency guardianship request. Weston had written a strong supporting letter. So had the school counselor, who had met Laura only once, but said she carried the caution of someone who had seen too much pain and was still learning to breathe. Now it was in motion. Temporary custody granted. The real process still lay ahead. Interviews, social worker visits, potential challenges, but they had crossed the threshold. Michael looked down at Laura. You did well. I almost threw up, she muttered. He smiled. You didn't. I still might, he chuckled. That's fair. They walked to the car in comfortable silence. For a moment, Michael imagined Elizabeth walking beside them, imagined her resting a hand on Laura's shoulder. The image was so vivid, so comforting. He felt tears prick at his eyes. Not from pain, but something gentler. Back home, Jake had set the table for 3. Nothing fancy, just tomato soup and grilled cheese, but Laura's eyes lit up at the sight of it. You made this? She asked. Jake shrugged. It's food. Don't expect miracles. Laura took a bite and smiled. Tastes like a miracle. Michael watched them both, heart full. Later that evening, as Jake was upstairs doing homework, Michael found Laura in the living room, flipping through the photo album again. She pointed to a picture. That's you and her? He nodded. At the lake. Our first summer here. She looks like she never stopped laughing, Laura said softly. She didn't, Michael replied, until she got sick. Even then, she kept smiling. For us. Laura traced the corner of the page. I think I would have liked her. I know she would have liked you. Laura hesitated. Do you think she'd want me to stay? Michael looked at her gently. I think she led you here. Laura met his eyes. I want to stay. He reached over and wrapped his hand around hers, firm and warm. Then stay, he said. This is your home now. She didn't cry, not this time, but her fingers gripped his tightly, and she didn't let go for a long while. It snowed for the first time that winter on a quiet Sunday morning. Light flurries drifted through the trees outside the window, dusting the rooftops and covering the world in a hush. Inside the Roberts house, the scent of cinnamon rolls filled the kitchen. Jake stirred hot cocoa at the stove, while Michael adjusted the framed photograph above the mantel, a new one. Laura stood between them, slightly awkward but smiling, her hair finely brushed and her shoulders no longer hunched in fear. Jake had his arm slung around her like he'd done it all his life. Michael had insisted on taking the picture last week, and now it lived where Elizabeth's wedding photo used to hang. Not replacing her, but standing beside her. 2 families, one past, one future. Later that afternoon, they gathered near the fireplace. Laura read aloud from a book she'd chosen at the library. Her voice was stronger now, more sure of itself, though every now and then she glanced at Michael, as if checking for approval. He only smiled, nodding, sipping his cocoa in quiet pride. Jake listened too, but eventually interrupted. Okay, she's read 3 chapters. My turn. He pulled out a guitar, the one Elizabeth had bought him when he was 10, back when he'd sworn he was going to be a rock star. It was dusty, but still in tune. He played something simple, a melody Elizabeth used to hum in the kitchen while cooking. Laura closed her eyes. Michael did too. That night, Laura stood by the window, watching the snow. Michael joined her. They stood in silence for a moment. You ever think about what would have happened, she asked, if Jake hadn't found me? I do, he said quietly, and I try not to. She glanced up at him. Do you think I belong here? Really? He turned toward her. Let me tell you something Elizabeth used to say. Family is not just who you're born to. It's who stands by you when everything else falls apart. Laura nodded slowly. I think she would have loved you, he added, not just because of who your mother was, but because of who you are. Laura looked back at the snow. Sometimes I feel like I'm still hiding in that barn. You're not, Michael said gently. You came out of the dark, and we're here. You're here. She didn't reply, but she leaned her head against his arm. Upstairs, Jake scrawled the final words in his notebook for school. Essay title, What Makes a Family? It's not just about blood. Sometimes family is found in the quiet spaces where love gets a second chance, where someone knocks and the door is opened, where no one has to be alone again. He looked out the window and saw his father and cousin still standing together in the snowlight. He smiled, then turned off the light.